The morning sun had barely started to warm the tarmac when a man walked toward the private jet terminal. He was dressed in simple closed dark jeans, a plain shirt, and a light jacket. Nothing about him screamed fame or wealth. He moved with calm purpose, carrying a small, worn bag over his shoulder. His steps were quiet, almost humble, and he didn't rush like most people who hurried to catch a flight. There was no entourage, no flashy car dropping him off, nothing that would make someone suspect he was someone important. Inside the terminal, the air smelled faintly of coffee and polished floors. The staff were busy preparing for the day, checking boarding passes, luggage, and catering. The man approached the counter slowly, smiling politely at the employee behind it. "Good morning," he said softly, holding out his boarding details. His voice was gentle, almost shy, but it carried a calm confidence. The employee glanced at him quickly and frowned. There was something about this man that made him pause, not because he looked out of place, but because he didn't look like the usual high-profile passenger who often boarded these jets. The employee, who had dealt with celebrities and wealthy clients for years, assumed he was someone unimportant, maybe a last-minute helper or someone who wasn't meant to be there. The way he treated the man reflected that assumption. "Sir, can I see your boarding confirmation again?" the employee asked, his tone sharp. There was a subtle edge of impatience, as if the man was wasting his time. He barely glanced at the smile the man offered him in return. "I need to make sure you're supposed to be here," he added, tapping on the keyboard without looking up. The man remained calm. He didn't raise his voice or get upset. Instead, he opened his small bag slowly and retrieved the necessary documents, handing them over with steady hands. "Here you go," he said politely. "I think everything should be in order." The employee scowled slightly and leaned back. He had worked in this environment for years and thought he had seen everything. To him, this was just another passenger trying to sneak in. He glanced at the documents quickly but didn't take his eyes off the man's face. He expected to see someone nervous or embarrassed, but instead he saw patience and respect. There was no arrogance, no complaint, no hint of annoyance. This only made the employee more suspicious around them. Other staff were busy with their tasks, but a few noticed the interaction. Something felt off? Most people entering a private jet terminal either had an entourage, wore expensive clothing, or carried themselves with a sense of entitlement. This man had none of that. He was quiet, humble, and polite, the exact opposite of what the employee expected. As the minutes passed, the employee's behavior grew colder. He leaned slightly forward, raising his voice just enough to assert authority. "Sir, I need to know exactly who you are and why you're here. This is a private flight, and only confirmed passengers are allowed." He tapped his fingers on the counter impatiently, glancing at the nearby staff as if to make them back him up. The man didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He simply smiled politely, keeping his eyes on the employee. "I understand," he said softly. "I have everything you need right here. I can show you my ID, my booking information, whatever you need to confirm me." His voice was calm, patient, and respectful. The employee's scowl deepened. He had seen plenty of people lie, bluff, or try to charm their way through security. But this man didn't do any of that. He didn't try to convince or charm. He didn't complain or demand special treatment. He simply waited with quiet confidence, allowing the employee to do his job. The employee, used to control and authority, felt uncomfortable. He wasn't sure how to handle someone who didn't react like the usual impatient. Entitled passengers, nearby, a junior staff member whispered to a colleague, trying to make sense of the situation. "Who does he think he is?" the junior asked. "He doesn't look like anyone important." The colleague shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe he's a late addition to the flight, but he's not acting like anyone we usually see here." The man noticed the whispering but didn't react. He stayed calm, polite, and focused on what needed to be done. There was something almost magnetic about his presence, not flashy or loud, but steady and kind. Even without saying much, he commanded a quiet respect from those around him. The employee decided to check the documents again. He flipped through the boarding confirmation, ID, and tickets with a meticulous eye. "Everything seems fine here," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. but you don't look like a passenger who belongs on this flight." His tone was rude, and there was a hint of condescension in his voice. The man remained calm. He looked at the employee and smiled gently. "I assure you, I am a confirmed passenger. I understand this is your responsibility to check, and I respect that. I'm happy to provide anything else you might need." His words were simple, but there was a sincerity to them that was hard to ignore. Around them, other staff started to notice the contrast. The employee was tense, scowling, and defensive. The man was quiet, patient, and polite. The tension in the room was subtle but noticeable. People started to whisper among themselves, sensing that something unusual was happening. The employee's pride and authority were challenged by someone who didn't even seem aware of it. The man didn't complain, didn't argue, and didn't assert power. He simply waited, calmly and respectfully, allowing the employee to do his job. This made the employee even more uneasy. He wasn't used to people treating him with patience when he was rude or dismissive. Usually, people would argue, complain, or leave. But not this man. Finally, the employee looked up from the documents and frowned. He didn't know what to make of the situation. "Fine," he said reluctantly. "You can board. But I still don't understand why you're dressed like this." His words were dismissive, but the man didn't react. The man smiled gently and nodded. "Thank you. I appreciate your work and your diligence. I hope the flight goes smoothly for everyone today." His calm, polite manner contrasted sharply with the employee's attitude. The employee couldn't figure out why he wasn't intimidated, angry, or frustrated. As the man walked toward the jet, staff watched quietly. There was a sense of curiosity in the air. Something about the man felt different. It wasn't his appearance, which was simple and unassuming. It wasn't his voice, which was soft and polite. It was the way he carried himself, calm, humble, respectful, and kind. No one could guess that this quiet, simple man was someone famous, someone wealthy, someone who could have demanded anything and received it instantly. Yet he didn't. He simply waited, respected the rules, and treated others with dignity. The employee, still confused and uneasy, turned to call the next passenger. He was not prepared for what was coming next. Little did he know this simple, quiet man walking onto the tarmac was someone the world knew and admired. But at that moment, no one in the terminal recognized him. It was a lesson in assumptions. Appearances could be deceiving. Patience and respect could be stronger than authority and power. And in the quiet way, the man walked toward the jet. With nothing but a small bag and a calm presence, he showed that true confidence didn't need to be loud or flashy. It spoke in silence, in dignity, and in quiet patience. As the man approached the steps of the jet, he glanced back one last time at the staff, giving a small nod of gratitude for their work. Even the employee who had been rude and dismissive couldn't help but notice the sincerity in that simple gesture. Something about it made him pause, though he didn't fully understand why. At that moment, no one in the terminal realized the impact of this interaction. The quiet, humble man had already left an impression that would linger long after he disappeared up the steps of the jet. And for the employee, the lesson had only just begun. The morning continued as usual. Passengers came and went, luggage was loaded, and the jet prepared for takeoff. Yet for those who had witnessed the exchange, there was a lingering sense of curiosity and wonder. Who was this quiet man who had faced rudeness with patience, condescension with calm, and dismissal with dignity? No one could have guessed at that moment the answer. The man had barely stepped onto the jet when the tension in the terminal seemed to linger like a heavy cloud. The employee, still frowning, shook his head slightly, muttering to himself. "I don't understand," he said quietly. He was used to dealing with passengers who were impatient, demanding, or loud, but this man, quiet, polite, and calm, had challenged him in a way he couldn't place. He had no idea that this passenger was someone the world knew, someone who could walk into any room and command attention without trying. Yet here he had been ignored, dismissed, and judged. The jet was sleek, spotless, and smelled faintly of leather and polish. A few crew members moved about, checking supplies, adjusting seating, and preparing for takeoff. The man moved slowly down the aisle, keeping his eyes calm and gentle as he glanced at the luxurious interior. It was the kind of environment most people would show off in, take selfies, or talk loudly about. But he didn't. He walked quietly, letting the surroundings speak for themselves, as if he were a guest in someone else's home rather than the most important person in the room. From the back of the jet, the employee watched, still confused. He whispered to another staff member, "I don't get it. Why isn't he acting like anyone else? Why isn't he showing off?" The other staff member shrugged, equally perplexed. "Maybe he's just different," they replied. But even as they said it, both of them felt a strange mix of respect and unease. There was something about the way he carried himself that didn't fit into the usual rules of wealth and status. The employee decided to step forward, thinking he needed to assert control. "Sir," he said in a firm tone, "I need to ask you again, why are you here? Are you sure you're supposed to be on this flight?" His words were sharper this time, almost challenging. He expected the man to respond with hesitation, confusion, or even frustration. The man stopped and looked at him with calm eyes. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make excuses. "I am sure," he said simply. "Everything is in order. If there is any concern, I am happy to show you my identification or booking details again." There was no defensiveness in his voice. Only patience and sincerity. The employee frowned, feeling a mix of irritation and embarrassment. He was used to being the authority in these situations, and this calm, simple man wasn't reacting the way anyone normally did. Usually people would argue, complain, or show some sign of frustration. But not this man. He was polite, respectful, and composed, as if nothing could disturb him. Nearby, another crew member had noticed the exchange. She leaned slightly toward a colleague and whispered, "There's something about him. He's different. He doesn't act like the others." The colleague nodded quietly. "Yeah, it's like he's real, calm, not worried about appearances." Meanwhile, the man moved further into the cabin, glancing at the seats and the small tables along the walls. He didn't touch anything he didn't need to. He didn't boast or comment on the luxury. He simply found his seat and settled in quietly, placing his small bag gently at his feet. He glanced at the staff again and gave a small, polite nod. "Thank you," he said softly. "I appreciate your work here. I know it can be stressful, and I respect that." The words were simple, but they carried weight. The employee, who had been tense and rude earlier, felt a moment of unease. He wasn't used to being thanked in situations where he had been dismissive. No one usually responded to his behavior with gratitude and patience. The calm, respectful way the man spoke made him realize he had misjudged the situation from the start. As the jet prepared for departure, luggage was loaded and the engines hummed softly in the background. The employee tried to maintain his professional composure, but he found himself glancing at the man repeatedly. He still didn't recognize him, but there was an undeniable sense that this passenger was extraordinary in some way. There was a quiet dignity to him that set him apart from everyone else the employee had ever encountered. The man noticed the glances but didn't react. He remained focused on his own thoughts, looking out the window at the tarmac and the rising sun. There was no rush, no anxiety, just a calm awareness of his surroundings. He smiled slightly to himself, appreciating the simple beauty of the morning and the quiet efficiency of the crew. Meanwhile, the employee began to feel frustrated. He didn't like feeling uncertain or out of control. He was used to authority and clear rules, and this calm, quiet man had disrupted both. "I need to know who he is," he muttered to himself, pacing slightly behind the seat rows. He tried to piece together the documents, the boarding information, and the small clues he had noticed. But nothing made sense. The man, sensing the tension but not wanting to escalate it, decided to speak again, not to confront but to reassure. "I am happy to help in any way to make your job easier," he said softly. "I understand your responsibility here, and I respect it. We all have our roles, and I don't wish to interfere with yours." His words were calm and kind, almost disarming in their simplicity. The employee stopped pacing and stared. He had never heard a passenger speak this way, so patient, so respectful and so composed. It made him pause, reconsider his assumptions, and feel a subtle guilt for his earlier behavior. He had judged this man based on appearance alone, assuming he was unimportant. Now, standing in the presence of someone so calm and dignified, he realized he had been wrong. Other staff members were watching quietly. A few had started to whisper among themselves, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. The man wasn't behaving like a celebrity or a wealthy client. He wasn't arrogant, demanding, or loud. He was simply human, polite, respectful, and calm in a way that made everyone around him notice the contrast between his behavior and the employee's. Finally, the employee took a deep breath and decided to address the situation directly. "Sir," he said, his voice softer this time, "I apologize for any misunderstanding earlier. I didn't realize. I should have been more careful." The man smiled gently, nodding slightly. "Thank you. I appreciate that. We all make mistakes. I understand the pressure of your work, and I respect that." His calm, gracious response made the employee feel both relief and embarrassment. He had expected confrontation, perhaps even anger, but instead, he received patience and understanding. The jet was now ready for takeoff. The engines were steady, and the cabin was quiet except for the soft hum of activity. The man leaned back in his seat, still calm, observing the crew and the preparations with a quiet appreciation. He didn't complain about the earlier incident. He didn't make a scene. He simply waited, dignified and patient, allowing the moment to pass without anger or resentment. As the plane began to taxi, the employee couldn't help but reflect on what had happened. He had misjudged the man from the start, assuming based on appearances that he was unimportant. He had acted dismissively, perhaps even rudely, but the man had handled it with grace. It was a lesson the employee couldn't ignore. Sometimes, the people who seem ordinary at first glance are extraordinary, in ways that aren't visible on the surface. The man looked out of the window as the plane gained speed. He watched the runway disappear beneath him, the city shrinking in the distance, and the morning sun lighting up the horizon. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that he had remained patient and kind, even when faced with disrespect. He understood that dignity wasn't about showing power or demanding recognition. It was about how you treated others. Even when they treated you poorly, the employee, still seated nearby, watched quietly. He felt a mixture of embarrassment and admiration. He realized he had judged too quickly, acted too harshly, and assumed too much. The man had shown him the value of patience, respect, and humility, lessons that were far more important than any protocol or rule. As the plane rose into the sky, a calm silence filled the cabin. Passengers relaxed and crew moved efficiently, but the memory of the earlier interaction lingered. The employee couldn't shake the feeling that he had just witnessed something extraordinary. Not in the way the man looked, dressed, or carried himself, but in the quiet strength of his character. For the man, the morning had been uneventful except for one thing. He had faced disrespect with patience, rudeness with calm, and misunderstanding with kindness. That simple approach had left an impression on everyone who had witnessed it, though they didn't yet know who he really was. He didn't need recognition or praise. He simply acted with dignity, and that was enough. By the time the jet reached cruising altitude, everyone in the cabin had settled into their roles, but the atmosphere had subtly changed. Staff, who had been tense earlier, now moved with more ease, inspired perhaps without realizing it by the man's calm and respectful demeanor. Even the employee who had been rude and dismissive found himself reflecting on his own behavior, realizing that patience and respect could achieve far more than authority or harshness ever could. The man closed his eyes for a moment, letting the gentle hum of the plane soothe him. He thought about the morning, the interaction, and the lesson it had provided not just for him, but for those around him. Sometimes the smallest gestures of patience, kindness, and dignity could leave the deepest marks, and so the flight continued. The man remained quiet, humble, and composed, a gentle presence that transformed a tense and uncomfortable situation into a subtle but powerful lesson in human decency. For those who had witnessed the exchange, the jet hummed steadily as it soared above the clouds, the sun reflecting off its sleek surface. Inside, the cabin was quiet, filled with the soft murmur of conversation from a few passengers and the occasional shuffle of crew members attending to their duties. Yet, in one corner, tension still lingered. The employee who had earlier been dismissive of the quiet passenger was unsettled, unable to shake off the feeling that something about him was unusual. He kept glancing discreetly, trying to read a clue that would explain why this seemingly ordinary man had handled the earlier situation with such calm confidence. The man, unaware of the growing curiosity around him, remained composed. He leaned back in his seat, hands resting lightly on his small bag, and gazed out of the window at the endless sky. He didn't flaunt his presence. He didn't speak unnecessarily. To anyone who saw him, he seemed like any other passenger, calm, polite, and unassuming. Yet, the quiet strength in his demeanor made those around him pause and reconsider their assumptions. The employee finally gathered the courage to step forward. He approached the man cautiously, careful not to seem confrontational. "Sir," he began, trying to keep his tone professional but failing to hide a hint of curiosity, I still don't understand. You handled everything so calmly." Most passengers would have reacted differently. "Can I ask why you didn't?" He trailed off, unsure of what to say next. The man turned to him, his expression calm and understanding. "I didn't react angrily because it wasn't necessary," he said gently. "When someone misunderstands you or treats you unfairly, losing patience only makes things harder. I believe in handling situations with respect and patience. That way, everyone is treated fairly and tension doesn't escalate." The employee blinked, momentarily taken aback. He had expected excuses, complaints, or even subtle arrogance, but not this explanation. There was a quiet wisdom in the man's words, a kind of understanding that made the employee pause and reflect. For a moment, he realized that he had been judging too quickly, assuming things about a person based solely on appearance. Meanwhile, other crew members began to notice the subtle shift in the cabin atmosphere. There was a calmness now that hadn't been there before, a gentle presence that seemed to influence everyone. Even the passengers who had been busy with their own tasks and conversations began to take notice, though none of them knew why. Something about the quiet, humble man had changed the energy of the room. The employee, still struggling to understand, decided to probe a little further. "Sir, can I ask, who are you exactly?" His voice was careful this time, almost hesitant. He didn't want to appear rude, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that this passenger was unlike anyone he had ever met. The man's lips curved into a small, polite smile. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a moment to consider his response. "I suppose that will become clear soon enough," he said calmly. "For now, I am just a passenger, like anyone else. My focus is on the journey and on being considerate of those around me." The employee's curiosity only grew. He had worked in environments with celebrities, politicians, and wealthy clients, and he was familiar with people who carried themselves with authority or arrogance. But this man didn't fit any of those patterns. He was humble, patient, and kind, qualities that were rare in such a setting. As the flight continued, the man noticed the small signs of tension among the crew. He had experienced situations like this before, where misunderstandings could escalate quickly if handled poorly. So he decided to act subtly without making a scene. He offered small gestures of kindness, a nod of thanks to the flight attendants, a gentle smile at the steward checking the supplies, and soft, respectful words when interacting with anyone who approached him. Each gesture, though simple, seemed to have a ripple effect. The crew members began to relax, responding with slightly more warmth and patience. Even the employee who had been dismissive earlier found himself questioning his own behavior. He realized that the man's calm demeanor was not weakness or ignorance, but a quiet form of strength that didn't need to be loud or demanding to be noticed. Then, a situation arose that put the man's patience to the test. A small technical issue with the cabin lighting caused a brief moment of confusion among the crew. One of the attendants muttered nervously, and a few passengers glanced around, uncertain what was happening. The employee, feeling a sense of responsibility, moved quickly to address the problem, but he did so with a noticeable tension. His earlier confidence shaken. The man observed quietly, without panic or complaint. When the employee hesitated, the man spoke up gently. "Would you like me to assist?" he asked softly. His voice was calm, steady, and unassuming, but there was an authority in it, not demanding, but reassuring. The employee froze for a moment, unsure what to make of the offer. He expected either a celebrity to demand things, complain, or ignore the staff. But here was this quiet passenger offering help in a polite, humble way. Something about it unsettled him, and yet made him pause and reflect. He nodded slowly, accepting the offer. Though he didn't quite understand why, he felt relieved. Together, they solved the minor issue quickly. The lights returned to normal, and the cabin resumed its calm rhythm. Passengers barely noticed the small disruption, but the crew did. They had witnessed a remarkable display of patience, humility, and quiet leadership from someone who, on the surface, seemed unassuming. The employee finally realized that he had misjudged the man entirely. It wasn't just about appearance or status. It was about character. This passenger had shown respect even when disrespected, patience when provoked, and kindness without expectation. That realization brought a subtle shame to the employee, but it was tempered by admiration. He understood that this was someone he would not forget. As the plane climbed higher, the man leaned back in his seat, glancing around quietly. He noticed the small changes, the crew moving with more confidence. The employee who had been tense now watching him with a mixture of curiosity and respect, and even the subtle acknowledgement from other passengers who had felt the calm shift in the cabin. It was a reminder that small acts of patience and respect could influence more than just the immediate situation. They could transform an entire environment. The employee, meanwhile, kept glancing discreetly at the man. His mind was racing with questions. Who was he really? Why had he acted this way? How could someone remain so composed under tension and disrespect? The employee knew he had seen people like this before in stories, but experiencing it firsthand was different. It was humbling, unsettling, and thought-provoking all at once. The quiet man seemed to sense the curiosity and tension without needing to address it directly. He remained polite, calm, and considerate, not flaunting his presence but also not hiding it. There was a quiet dignity in the way he carried himself, a reminder that true confidence doesn't need to be loud or demanding. It can be silent, patient, and respectful, yet still command attention and influence those around you. At one point, the employee whispered to another crew member, "Do you think he's important? I mean, really important?" The other shook their head, equally unsure. "I don't know, but there's something about him. Something different." The man overheard just enough to smile faintly to himself. He didn't take offense, nor did he correct them. He understood that recognition was not the goal. The goal was to act with integrity, patience, and respect, regardless of whether anyone noticed. That quiet principle guided him through the flight and through life. And it was evident in every small gesture he made. Hours passed as the jet crossed miles of sky, the sun rising higher and casting golden light through the windows. The calm, composed atmosphere created by the man's presence became a quiet lesson for everyone on board. Crew members moved with more consideration. Passengers spoke with slightly more politeness. And even the initially rude employee seemed to be reflecting on his behavior, reconsidering how he judged people too quickly. Finally, the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, and the moment arrived when the man's true identity was about to be revealed. The employee, still puzzled and curious, prepared himself for the eventual explanation. There was a nervous tension in his chest. He knew that whatever came next would change the way he had been thinking. The quiet passenger, sensing the approaching moment, didn't react outwardly. He remained composed, calm, and humble, as if nothing had changed. The difference was not in him, it was in the perception of those around him. Soon, the truth would become clear, and the employee would realize that the patience, dignity, and quiet confidence he had witnessed belonged to someone extraordinary, someone the world knew and admired. Until then, the cabin remained peaceful. The small acts of kindness, patience, and humility that had unfolded during the flight continued to ripple quietly through the jet, leaving impressions that would last far beyond the duration of the journey. The man's simple, human approach to handling disrespect and tension had already changed the environment. And soon it would change the understanding of the employee and crew entirely. The quiet passenger remained seated, hands folded, eyes gazing out at the endless sky. The employee, glancing at him for the last time before the revelation, realized he had been in the presence of someone remarkable, not because of fame, wealth, or status, but because of Kara. The jet continued its smooth flight, slicing through the clouds with a quiet hum. The cabin had settled into a gentle rhythm, the earlier tension now replaced with a sense of calm curiosity. The crew moved efficiently, checking supplies and attending to passengers, but a quiet undercurrent of anticipation lingered. There was something about the man seated in the corner that drew attention, even if no one could quite place it. His calm composure, polite gestures, and gentle demeanor had left a lasting impression, and everyone in the cabin seemed subtly aware that this was not an ordinary passenger. The employee who had treated him dismissively earlier still struggled to understand. He had observed the passenger's patient and respectful responses throughout the flight, and it had unsettled him more than he could admit. Usually he was confident in handling high-profile passengers, knowing how to assert authority and maintain control. But this man had quietly disarmed him without even trying. Every glance, every nod, every polite word seemed to carry a weight of dignity that was impossible to ignore. Finally, after what felt like hours of quiet reflection, the moment arrived. The senior crew member, who had been observing the employee's unease, approached the passenger gently. "Sir, would you mind showing your identification again?" she asked, keeping her tone polite and neutral. She wasn't asking out of doubt, but to confirm details before the final preparations for landing. The man smiled softly, a calm and reassuring gesture. He reached into his bag and retrieved a small identification card. It was subtle, nothing flashy, but it clearly bore his name and credentials. He handed it over to the crew member with quiet confidence. "Here you go," he said. "I hope this clarifies everything." As the crew member examined the ID, the employee leaned closer, his curiosity now mixed with a sense of apprehension. When he recognized the name, his eyes widened, and a wave of shock passed over him. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The man he had dismissed, treated rudely, and assumed was unimportant was someone the world knew and admired. A quiet, calm recognition settled over him, and he felt a mixture of embarrassment, awe, and disbelief. The passenger, noticing the shift in the employee's expression, didn't react with arrogance or anger. He remained composed, smiling gently. His calmness only heightened the contrast between his behavior and the employee's earlier dismissiveness. "It's okay," he said softly. "I understand that assumptions happen. What matters is how we handle them, and I appreciate your efforts to do your job." The employee felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to apologize, to explain, to say something meaningful, but words failed him. All he could do was stare, overwhelmed by the realization that he had misjudged someone so completely. The humility and grace with which the passenger handled the earlier disrespect made the employee reflect deeply on his own behavior. He had assumed status could be judged by appearance, but he now saw that character and kindness were far more powerful and lasting around the cabin. Other crew members and a few passengers had begun to notice the tension. Whispers spread quietly as people began to realize who the man really was. The atmosphere shifted once more, this time with a mix of awe and curiosity. Everyone who had witnessed the calm and polite demeanor now understood that this was no ordinary passenger. He had carried himself with dignity, respect, and patience throughout the entire journey, without ever demanding recognition or special treatment. The senior crew member, now holding the identification, looked at him with newfound respect. "Sir," she said softly, I had no idea. I'm so sorry for any confusion or inconvenience earlier. Thank you for your patience." The man nodded, his smile gentle and forgiving. "Thank you. There's no need to apologize. Everyone makes mistakes, and I understand the pressures of your work." What matters is that we treat each other with respect, even when misunderstandings occur. His words were simple, yet they carried a profound sense of wisdom and humility. The employee, still trying to process the revelation, took a deep breath. He finally found his voice. I am so sorry for the way I treated you. I assumed things based on appearances and I acted poorly. I hope you can forgive my behavior. The man's smile didn't waver. There's nothing to forgive, he said softly. What matters is that we learn from these moments. Respect, patience, and kindness are more important than assumptions or appearances. We can always choose how we respond to others. The words struck the employee deeply. He felt a wave of humility, realizing that this man had demonstrated more grace in a single interaction than most people could manage in a lifetime. It was a lesson that would stay with him forever, a reminder that dignity and respect are earned through actions, not through titles, wealth, or fame. As the plane continued its journey, the passenger remained quiet, calm, and composed. He didn't demand special attention or recognition, nor did he flaunt his identity. Instead, he focused on observing the world around him, appreciating the work of the crew, and maintaining a presence that was both gentle and powerful. Every small gesture, from a nod of thanks to a polite smile, carried a weight that transformed the cabin atmosphere. The employee, now fully aware of who he had been interacting with, felt a mixture of embarrassment and admiration. He realized that he had misjudged the man entirely, assuming that status and appearance dictated character. Instead, he now understood that true greatness lay in humility, patience, and respect for others, regardless of their position or fame. Other crew members, having witnessed the revelation, were similarly affected. They whispered quietly among themselves, amazed at how the man had handled the earlier disrespect with such calm dignity. They realized that this was not just a lesson in etiquette or protocol, but a lesson in human decency, a reminder that kindness and patience could influence even the most tense or challenging situations. The passenger, sensing the subtle admiration and reflection in those around him, didn't react outwardly. He remained humble, his focus on the journey and on treating others with respect. There was no need for fanfare or recognition. His actions spoke louder than any words could, and the impact was clear to everyone who had witnessed them. The employee, still processing his feelings, approached the passenger once more. I don't know how to thank you for your patience and understanding. I've never experienced anything like this before. The man nodded gently. Thank you for saying that. But remember, it's not about thanks. It's about how we treat each other every day. Every small act of patience and respect can make a difference. That is something we can all practice, no matter our role or status. The words settled in the employee's mind like a gentle but firm lesson. He reflected on his own assumptions, his earlier rudeness, and the ways he had judged people too quickly. For the first time, he truly understood that appearances could be misleading, and that humility and respect were far more important than authority or recognition. The cabin remained calm and quiet, but the energy had shifted. Where tension and discomfort had once lingered, there was now a subtle sense of awe and reflection. Passengers who had noticed the earlier interactions exchanged glances, realizing that they had witnessed something extraordinary, not in the usual sense of spectacle or fame, but in the quiet human power of dignity, patience, and respect. As the jet continued toward its destination, the passenger remained composed, unaffected by the revelation of his identity. He didn't seek praise or attention. He simply continued to act with the same humility, patience, and kindness that had defined his presence throughout the flight. Each gesture, each polite word, each small smile reinforced the lesson he had already imparted. True greatness is measured not by recognition or status, but by character, respect, and the way we treat others. The employee, now deeply changed by the encounter, watched quietly. He felt a mix of shame for his earlier behavior and gratitude for the lesson he had received. The passenger's quiet strength had revealed a truth that was both simple and profound. Dignity and respect are choices we make, and those choices can influence everyone around us in ways we might never expect. The senior crew member, still holding the identification, looked at the passenger once more. "Sir, thank you for your patience and understanding. You have shown all of us something remarkable today." The man nodded gently. "Thank you. It's not about recognition. It's about being human, treating each other with respect, even when situations are challenging. That is what truly matters." The employee, finally finding his words, said softly, "I will never forget this lesson. Thank you for showing me the importance of patience and respect." The passenger's calm smile remained unchanged. "I hope you remember it not just today, but every day. Small acts of kindness and understanding can have a ripple effect far greater than we realize." The jet continued through the sky, carrying everyone toward their destination. But the impact of the revelation had already taken hold. The employee, the crew, and even the other passengers were changed in subtle ways. They had witnessed the quiet power of patience, humility, and dignity, a reminder that true greatness is not measured by fame or recognition, but by the way we treat those around us. And as the passenger leaned back, hands resting gently on his small bag, he remained calm, composed, and humble, leaving an impression that would linger long after the flight had ended. The lesson was clear: resp. The plane began its descent, the city below slowly coming into view through the large windows. Streets, buildings, and cars appeared like tiny models, and the soft glow of the late afternoon sun lit everything with a warm, golden hue. Inside the cabin, there was a quiet hum of activity as the crew began the final preparations for landing. Passengers adjusted their seats, checked their belongings, and prepared to leave the jet, but the atmosphere had shifted. There was a subtle sense of reflection among everyone who had witnessed the earlier interactions with the quiet, humble passenger. The employee who had been rude and dismissive earlier sat quietly, staring out of the window. He felt a mixture of embarrassment, awe, and gratitude. He had misjudged someone so completely based on appearance alone. He had treated the man with disrespect, thinking he was unimportant, only to learn that he had been wrong. More than that, he had witnessed the power of patience, humility, and kindness firsthand. The lesson was something he knew he would carry for the rest of his life. The passenger, sitting calmly in his seat, observed the preparations without fuss or distraction. He didn't seek attention, and he didn't ask for special treatment. His presence had already transformed the environment, but he remained humble, focused on being considerate to everyone around him. The crew felt it, the passengers felt it, and even the employee felt it deeply. As the plane touched down smoothly on the runway, a soft cheer from some passengers could be heard, though most remained quiet, immersed in their thoughts. The jet taxied to its designated gate, and the crew began assisting passengers in gathering their belongings and preparing to disembark. The atmosphere was calm, respectful, and surprisingly warm. Given the tension that had existed hours earlier, the employee finally gathered his courage. He approached the passenger slowly, his expression a mixture of nervousness and sincerity. "Sir," he said, his voice soft and slightly trembling, "I just want to thank you. Not just for your patience during the flight, but for showing me something I will never forget. I acted poorly earlier, and I hope you can forgive my behavior." The man smiled gently, a warm, reassuring gesture. "There is nothing to forgive," he said softly. "We all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them and treat others with respect. That is far more important than pride or appearances." The words resonated deeply with the employee. He felt a wave of humility and understanding wash over him. For the first time, he realized that true greatness is not about status, fame, or outward recognition. It is about character, patience, and the way we treat others. The man had demonstrated all of that quietly, without demanding attention or praise, and the impact was undeniable. Other crew members who had witnessed the interaction quietly nodded to themselves. They had seen the power of calm dignity and respectful behavior in action. The flight, which had started with tension and discomfort, had ended as a lesson in humanity. It was a reminder that the way we treat people matters far more than assumptions, appearances, or social status. As passengers began to disembark, some paused to glance at the quiet man who had transformed the atmosphere of the jet. They didn't speak, and they didn't approach him for autographs or recognition. Yet they carried with them a sense of awe, admiration, and reflection. They had seen humility, patience, and kindness demonstrated in a way that was simple yet profoundly powerful. The employee, standing a few steps behind the passenger, finally spoke again. I will remember this for the rest of my life, he said earnestly. Thank you for showing me that patience and respect are far more important than appearances or status. The man nodded gently. I am glad you understand, he said softly. It's a lesson we can all practice. Every small act of kindness and respect can have a ripple effect, far beyond what we might ever see. The words lingered in the employee's mind as he watched the man walk down the aisle and step out of the jet. There was a quiet humility in the way he moved, a simple grace that did not demand attention but naturally drew it. Even without grandeur or display, he commanded respect through his actions and presence. The employee felt a profound sense of gratitude for having witnessed this first-hand as the passenger walked toward the exit. Crew members and some passengers subtly stepped aside, giving him space. No one wanted to disturb his calm, quiet dignity. And though many now recognized him, they sensed that what mattered most was not who he was, but how he had treated them and the lessons he had imparted. The employee stayed behind, taking a deep breath. He reflected on the morning, the flight, and the events that had unfolded. He realized that he had learned something far more valuable than any protocol or procedure could teach. He had learned that patience, humility, and kindness were more powerful than authority, appearances, or wealth. He had learned that every interaction, no matter how small, carried the potential to teach, inspire, and transform. The rest of the passengers filed out quietly, many still talking softly about the calm, humble man who had remained polite and composed throughout the flight. Some whispered to the crew, expressing surprise at how such a simple presence could change the energy of the entire cabin. Others quietly reflected on their own behavior, considering how they might practice patience and respect in their own lives. Meanwhile, the passenger walked steadily, his small bag in hand, moving through the terminal with the same calm and dignity that had defined him throughout the journey. He didn't linger or seek attention. His goal was not to impress or to be recognized. His goal was simply to live and act with integrity, patience, and respect. No matter the circumstances, the employee watched him disappear through the terminal doors, a mixture of awe, gratitude, and inspiration filling his mind. He had witnessed someone extraordinary not because of fame or wealth, but because of the quiet strength of character. He knew that the lessons learned from this encounter would remain with him forever, shaping the way he treated people, judged situations, and approached life itself. Later, as the employee returned to his duties, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He moved with more patience, spoke with more kindness, and treated every passenger with respect, regardless of appearance or status. The quiet man on the jet had taught him a lesson that was far more powerful than any training manual could provide. It was a lesson in humanity, humility, and dignity, a reminder that the way we treat others defines who we are far more than any title or recognition ever could. Even after the day ended and the jet had left the terminal, the story of the quiet passenger spread subtly among the staff. They talked about the calm, patient, and humble man who had quietly transformed the atmosphere of the flight. They reflected on how he had treated disrespect with grace, rudeness with patience, and misunderstanding with kindness. It became a lesson they would share for months to come, a story of quiet dignity that left a lasting impression on everyone involved. The passenger's impact didn't stop at the crew or fellow passengers. His actions were a reminder to everyone in the terminal that day, and those who later heard the story, that humility, patience, and respect are far more powerful than arrogance, assumptions, or status. One person, simply by being kind and composed, had reminded everyone around him of what it truly meant to be human. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the terminal, the employee paused for a moment and reflected on the day's events. He felt gratitude not just for witnessing the remarkable composure of the passenger, but for the lessons he had learned about himself. He realized that assumptions, Quick judgments and pride can blind people to the true character of others. He understood now that dignity, patience, and respect are choices we make in every interaction. And those choices leave lasting ripples. The passenger, by the time he exited the terminal, had returned to the world quietly, humbly, and without fanfare. Yet the impact of his actions remained a quiet ripple through the hearts and minds of everyone he had encountered. It was a lesson in humility, a demonstration of the power of respect, and a reminder that greatness is measured not by fame or wealth, but by the way one treats others in everyday life. The employee, standing in the terminal, felt a shift within himself. He knew he would approach his work, his life, and his interactions with others differently from that day forward. He had learned that assumptions can be dangerous, that patience can transform tense moments, and that respect and humility are far more powerful than any authority or status. And so, as the night settled over the city and the terminal grew quiet, the memory of the quiet, humble passenger lingered. The lessons he had imparted through patience, dignity, and respect would stay with the employee, the crew, and even those passengers who had witnessed him. It was a reminder that small, thoughtful actions could leave a profound impact, and that true greatness lies not in recognition or fame, but in character, kindness, and integrity. The flight had ended, the journey complete, but the story and the lesson remained.